Getting a second passport expands your options in many ways, including the countries that you can travel to. Even if you have a Western passport, getting a second passport could offer travel opportunities to new places. But it also, if used on its own, could restrict your travel. And today I'm going to talk about countries that many second passports can't go to. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. What I want to talk about today is primarily for folks who have top quality passports, what we call the TRA passport. Now, we saw many of these TRA passports, in particular the U.S. passport, get decimated during the height of the pandemic, where at one point the U.S. passport had the same travel freedoms as a Rwandan passport. There were so many countries that you couldn't go into. And even now in 2022, I'm continuing to see a few Asian countries that are saying, Americans, for example, even with a residence permit, not welcome. You have too many cases for our taste. And so when you look at the idea of getting a second passport, that can be a plan B. And so you want to be prepared to have as many options as possible with that plan B, or perhaps you have a couple different plan Bs in a passport portfolio. But let's say you perhaps gave up your original passport at some point. Maybe you're an American and you're tired of the far-reaching hand of the U.S. government. Maybe other governments from Western countries do the same in the future. You'd like to at least have, again, one or a series of passports that allow you to continue your life. And yet there are a number of countries that if you're not from the U.S., you're not from an EU country, you're not from a handful of TRA countries, you're going to have a hard time getting into. I've broken it down into 3 different categories. Now, the first category is what we call the CUNA countries. And so many second passports, including the ones that you can obtain through, let's say, citizenship by investment, are not going to have access to Canada, the U.S., New Zealand, Australia. In some countries, we'll say sometimes UCUNA, which includes the UAE for people who are doing business. The UAE is easy enough to get a residence permit. You start a business there. There are an increasing number of what we call Tier B, kind of mid-level passports that can go there. But Canada, U.S., New Zealand, Australia, countries that have been pretty difficult for anyone to get into in the last couple years to begin with. But those are countries that are going to be relatively hard to come by. A lot of people ask, like, how do I make sure I can go back to Canada or to the U.S. or to Australia? And again, there are, in some cases, only a few dozen passports, and those passports can generally be very difficult. It's not like they're available, you can't go out and buy German citizenship or Korean citizenship, right? Malta is the one answer to get into those countries. If you want to go through their citizenship program, it's going to cost you about $1 million and up to do that. So Canada, U.S., New Zealand, and Australia, for most citizens in the world, difficult countries to get into without a visa, and they are some of the more difficult visas to get. It's not necessarily a formality as it might be to get, let's say, a Thai visa. The second group of countries are places where certain Tier B or Caribbean citizenships will have a hard time getting into, but they're not necessarily difficult visas to get. And so let me give you an example. Mexico is a country that is very welcoming to citizens of Western countries, TRA passports. They're also welcoming potentially to people from large countries like Russia and other countries that have what they believe are wealthy enough tourists. So like Malaysia, for example. Malaysia is a pretty good passport, but they can't go to the U.S. They're not quite at that level. But, okay, Mexico will have them. But you look at a Caribbean country, Caribbean citizenship by investment, none of those countries can go to Mexico. Now, you can get a Mexican residence permit. You can get a Mexican visa relatively easily. The bureaucracy is going to be the biggest issue if you're not living in that Caribbean country. But Mexico, really, most people in the world need a visa to go to Mexico. A lot of Americans wouldn't think that. They just say, hey, Mexico is easy to go to. But yet they have a relatively strict visa policies for that second level, that Tier B level of citizen. And so, if you're Serbian, if you are, Thai, if you are, a lot of these just, again, smaller countries that have otherwise good passports, Mexico could be difficult. Other countries that just maybe never got around to developing a lot of visa-free relationships, Paraguay. Thailand is also pretty strict like Mexico. Again, easy enough to get a visa. They're not going to let you live there on a visa, but if you just want to visit once in a while, pretty easy tourist visa to get. They have numerous residence programs by making a donation or making an investment, buying property. It's easy enough to get in, but it's an extra step. You can't just go there. Morocco, South Africa, And I added also Saudi Arabia, which used to be almost impossible for anyone to get into, but now you see e-visa facilities for, let's say, EU citizens. Even like Montenegro, for example, has access. But a lot of the other countries, if you want to do business in that part of the world, you'll still need to get a visa. So what we've covered so far is, places where most people in the world need to get a visa, which is Canada, U.S., Australia, and New Zealand, and then places where these Tier B passports that are more easily obtainable, the ones we talk about, again, Caribbean citizenship by investment, paper residence countries, those kind of passports that are more readily and affordably available to people who want a Plan B. Those are some countries that you couldn't go to. And then what other countries can't most people go to? And I'll tell you what brought me to thinking about this. I was creating my own visa-free travel map recently. I was taking all the different visa-free and e-visa facilities that I have through different citizenships, and I put it all on one map. It was a pretty nice map, and I can go to most places in the world. A couple of these would be places that I can't go to. But there's also countries where no matter how many different potential passports that I could get, I looked up, none of them could go to these countries I'm going to tell you next. And this is going to serve to make a point, because the countries that almost no one can go to, unless you maybe are born in the country next door, or you're from a limited number of places, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. This is from my map. I looked at the gray spots, the empty spots on my map where I can't go. Turkmenistan, very difficult. I think every single country needs a visa. Bhutan, easy enough to get. They have high impact, low tourism numbers, so you have to pay, more to get into Bhutan. North Korea, probably not on most people's list. Djibouti in East Africa, Algeria, Libya, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Central African Republic, and Nigeria. So I'm looking at my map, and I've got multiple citizenships, and I look at, different ones offer different things. So I might have one country in my portfolio that's a little bit bigger and has a little bit more strength in negotiating, travel. And so they might get Morocco, for example, which is a country that's not open to a lot of people. And so I've filled in a lot of those gaps in the first two categories just by having multiple citizenships. But these are the countries that it's very difficult. Now, if you are from another ECOWAS country, the Western African States Organization, you can go to Nigeria without a visa. So Cape Verde, for example, used to have a citizenship program, and potentially still does. Very opaque, and not really anybody knows how it works, but potentially you can become a citizen of Cape Verde, and then you'd have access to a few of these African countries, these West African countries. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to get in. You're going to have to go through the process. And so there are people, for example, in the citizenship industry who want to go and open an office in Nigeria. And so it's going to be difficult for them to necessarily get that visa or to get a residence permit or to get their way into the country, into some of these places. And so most people watching probably don't have a hankering to go to these countries. In fact, if you're not a U.S. citizen and you want to make sure you can go to the U.S., there's a couple countries on this list that, quite frankly, would make it more difficult to go to the U.S. You would have to answer, yes, I've been in Syria, and they don't like that as much. But the point of this last list is, the countries that are just very difficult for almost anyone to go to. For me, as someone who's spent time, carefully building a portfolio, again, I was looking at hey, maybe I could qualify for this, maybe I could do that. I went on a limb on some of these. I mean, these are the countries at the end that have the most restrictive visa policies. Almost everything else you can manage. Now, again, many people are not going to have access to U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand unless they get an EU passport, or you live in Korea for a bunch of years and learn the language, or you find that your mother was Taiwanese, or Chile perhaps is the most accessible way to, outside of Europe, get a citizenship. They can get you into those countries without a visa. But that's doable, right? The Tier B, passports, the ones that they have a harder time going to, the Thailands, whatever, those are also, you can also fill those in. But the countries that you're going to have a hard time going to, if travel is important to you, and I certainly think that for many people, you're going to go to 10 different countries, how much visa-free travel you have is probably overrated in the scheme of people who are offering you citizenship. But if you want travel for business, for pleasure, whatever it may be, the places that you're going to have the hardest time going are the places that you probably don't care about. And so what I want to use as an example to tell you is, if you're concerned about losing access to places because you are building a passport portfolio, in very few cases is it even going to matter. Now, certainly, if you are an American and you give up your U.S. citizenship and you have a Caribbean citizenship or a Montenegrin citizenship or whatever, you're going to need to apply for a visa. And it's not the world's easiest visa by any stretch to get. Canada, Australia, etc. I have some very wealthy people that we've worked with who have been rejected for Australian visas. Now, they are not Caribbean citizens. They are generally from Eastern Europe, and there's perhaps a stigma against that. But those visas are not as easy. But otherwise, outside of maybe 3 or 4 countries, I think that you're going to be very well accepted pretty much anywhere that you want to go. And most people are not going to judge you, as we've said before, by the fact that, oh, he's got a Dominica passport, or oh, he's got Montenegrin passport, or even Turkish passport. There are occasionally stories. People get asked a few questions that may be abnormal for some Western citizens. But this is the power of a passport portfolio, is that you can be able to have multiple options to travel to countries, do business in countries, invest in countries, and you're really not going to lose a lot. And so if you are a Western citizen, you've got a great passport, I'm not saying to get rid of that passport. I'm saying have the option that if for some reason you can't get your passport renewed, if for some reason maintaining your citizenship is a burden, or you just, it becomes expensive, or there's chaos in your country, or whatever, you want to have a plan B that actually functions. And this goes to show that if you thoughtfully create your passport portfolio, your plan B, you are not going to be kept out of very many places. And the places that you're going to be kept out of, by and large, are places that you probably never considered in the first place. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.